This is hands down the biggest twist of One Piece that we've seen yet. Like seriously, even bigger than Luffy being revealed to be a god. Because based on the way the chapter ends, and the fact that who we see on the final page is likely not a friend and is here to take out some people, this can only lead to one of two reveals. And neither are good for the Straw Hats. Gotta say, this was one hell of a way to end the year for One Piece because we're not getting a chapter next week due to the holiday, which means we're leaving off on this cliffhanger until 2025. Which, yeah, on the one hand sucks, really sucks, because we want to know, like yesterday, what the hell this final page is all about. But at the same time, it gives us about 2 weeks to come up with all the crazy theories we can to try and explain what we just saw, which I'm definitely going to be spending all my time doing. But before we get into any of that, let's start this video off with the most controversial topic of the chapter, which, luckily for us, is basically the beginning anyway. We see that both Lilith and Bonnie have joined the Straw Hats in accompanying Robin on her grand reunion with Saul. Well, actually, we knew that Bonnie was with them. We saw her sitting in Robin's lap on the boat ride over. In fact, the two have basically been glued at the hip ever since they left Egghead, with Robin being her main caretaker in place of Kuma, who, by the way, we will finally be sort of addressing in a bit in the chapter. But it did surprise me to find out that Lilith had joined him as well, mostly because we didn't see her at all in the lead up to the big moment in the last chapter. In fact, we stopped seeing her altogether after page 6 of the chapter, so it's easy to think that she decided to stay behind with the other giants and, was letting the crew have their big moment, which made seeing her in the chapter kind of weird. I mean, it was kind of like, oh hey, you're here too. Why? Like, I get that she's here to set up what her journey is going to be going forward, but honestly, her just showing up in the chapter kind of made me think for a second Oda just kind of forgot to draw her. But as it turns out, Oda did actually show us in the last chapter that Lilith was there the entire time, and all of us missed it, or at the very least I did. Now, if you don't know what I mean, then I ask you to go back and check page 11 of the last chapter, and on the very last panel of that page, where we see Robin walking towards the seemingly unconscious giant, we can see what I originally only noticed in the background, Gerd and another female giant, who, by the way, we do get a name for in the chapter. Turns out is An. She's actually Saul's assistant, and we do get to see a bit more of her in this chapter, which is a lot of fun because I do kind of enjoy her design. And I completely missed this when I read the chapter, if you look underneath them, you can see the silhouette of the rest of the Straw Hats standing there right beside them. Now, there should only be 10 there, Robin's 9 other crewmates plus Bonnie, but if you count the silhouettes, there's actually 11 of them. Although admittedly, the one on the right side of Frankie is cut off a bit by the edge of the panel and might not actually be a person, but considering how there's only one other child-sized silhouette there, and we need a total of 2 for both Chopper and Bonnie, I'm going to count it. Which means one of these 11 we see there must be Lilith, and I'm guessing it's the one we see on the left of Jinbei, which makes sense because A, it's the one that looks the closest to her overall design, and 2, he's the one she entrusted with carrying her secret package along with them to the meeting. What's in that mysterious package, you ask? Well, this is what I'm guessing is going to make this chapter a bit controversial amongst the fans. So it turns out, before escaping Egghead, Lilith managed to grab a clone of the real Dr. Vegapunk and sneak it onto the Sunny, which is what she brought with her in that box. And as soon as I read this part of the chapter, I could already hear the collective groans amongst the fans about another character's death being basically undone. And while I can sort of agree, we do have to admit that this one's a bit different and was actually properly set up. For one, we had already discovered very early on in Egghead that cloning was a thing that Vegapunk had figured out. In fact, it might be the only thing he really invented by himself and not just reverse engineered from the Void Century. And since we saw that there were spare clones and body parts for each of the satellites stored in the labo phase on the off chance that they were killed off, it wasn't that big of a leap to think that Vegapunk made one for himself too. I mean, I know we don't give Vegapunk a lot of credit for actually being smart, but considering the fact that he has the ability to create clones, this was actually the smart thing to do, especially since he knew eventually his research would put him on the chopping block with the World Gov. Now, unlike the satellites, his is an actual human clone and not whatever the hell they are. I was never actually sure on that. Like, my first guess is that they're meant to be some kind of cyborgs, or at the very least Lilith and York are, but Edison and Pythagoras look more like full-on robots. And then, when it comes down to Shaka and Atlas, I have absolutely no idea what they're supposed to be, mostly because we never find out that Shaka's helmet was actually just a helmet, or his actual head. Although, as of right now, if I had to bet, I would put money on it being his actual head. Anyway, point is, this is a clone much more in the line of what Stussy is, and is based on a much younger Vegapunk who had visited Elbaf 20 years prior, which in and of itself brings up a bunch of questions. For starters, since this is a younger Vegapunk, will this one only have the memories from when it was created, or the Vegapunk that died on Elbaf? I mean, I guess as long as they can connect them to Punk Records, it won't be a problem downloading those memories into this new clone body, but that does bring up an even bigger question. Will this clone have access to Vegapunk's Devil Fruit? Because we know, based on the Seraphim, you can't create clones that have the same devil fruit as the original person without the green blood. Or at least we think this. Could be Vegapunk was lying to the World Gov about that because he didn't want them having that kind of tech. But assuming he was telling the truth, this clone will need the green blood to use his devil fruit, which I doubt Lilith currently has on her. Although she did manage to sneak this giant box off the island without anyone noticing, so who knows, maybe she hid a few vials of the green blood inside her jacket. But even if she didn't, she does plan on staying on the Island of Giants until she can safely release the clone Vegapunk from the box, so she'll have plenty of time to develop some. Also, she says she plans to find a way to save Kuma and turn him back into a full human too, presumably with his memories intact. Which honestly makes Bonnie very excited, and honestly me too, because this whole time I've been dreading the moment we would have to say our teary goodbyes to one of the best dads in One Piece, but now that weight on my chest has been lifted because we won't have to. Nope, Kuma gets to live and possibly go back to normal, certainly a happy moment, although this might mean we really aren't seeing either Bonnie or Lilith join the crew. I mean, Lilith is definitely out after the chapter, there's no question about that, but I am still pulling for Bonnie. I really feel like the amount of time she's been spending with the crew is meant to be leading up to her joining. I mean, why else put so much focus on her bonding with them like family? But that being said, I also thought the same thing about Carrot all the way up to the end of Wano, and well, that did not go the way I hoped. But we still won't know for sure if she's going to join until the end of the arc, so until then, we just have to sit back and enjoy the fun she's having with the crew. Now, real quick, two things that made me laugh in this chapter before we go on to the next part. I really loved how Lasso looked during his entire interaction with Lilith during the chapter. Really reminded me of how it feels trying to explain modern tech to any of my older family members. And I enjoyed how the chapter opened with Luffy's introduction to Saul, him imitating the way people from Wano speak as a show of respect for what the Giant's done for his crewmate, and the fact that everyone calls him out for doing it. Not because he shouldn't be doing this, because obviously as a captain it's something he should do. Saul saved Robin's life and is the main reason why she was able to continue on despite everything that happened to her up until she joined the crew. So of course he should express his gratitude. They're mostly just making fun of him for how weird he's being about it. And speaking of weird, we have the crew once again split up so that they can go and explore both the Owl Library and the Walrus School. Robin, Chopper, Lilith, and Bonnie go with Saul to the library, and as soon as they walk in, the book Robin was holding immediately grows inside. I know the normal go-to for anything that looks like magic in One Piece is actually devil fruit or hockey related, but as of right now, we haven't seen either being used to explain any of the extraordinary things that happen naturally on the island. Although we do see a giant owl sitting on the tree inside the library in the chapter, so maybe it's a devil fruit user and is somehow the one responsible for enlarging the books as soon as they enter inside the library, but until we get a proper explanation of how any of this works, I'm going to just call it magic. Now, the other half of the crew go to the Walrus School, mostly following Usopp and Luffy, who are excited by the idea of meeting the next generation of Elbaf warriors. And while they're there, they end up meeting a brand new giant who is the teacher of the school named Ripley, who I have a very strong feeling is going to be a fan favorite after this chapter. Also, I have a strong feeling that Sanji is going to be very jealous of Luffy when he finds out where he was standing when he first met Ripley. Anyway, she ends up explaining to the crew that the late king could actually work towards moving Elbaf away from being a warrior culture into one that's much more modern. Even opening up the island to trading with other nations, basically doing exactly what Odin had dreamed of doing for Wano. Unfortunately though, just like Odin, he was killed before he could actually see that dream realized. Now, there's two things to really take away from this talk. One, Usopp finding out that the giants are moving away from the warrior lifestyle is going to impact him in some major way during this arc. I just haven't figured out exactly how yet. The second is that this half of the crew now also know that Prince Loki killed his father, which means everyone on the crew now knows that Loki is not someone to be trusted and should be considered an enemy. So it's going to make things even more awkward when Luffy eventually frees him. Although Oda might actually be sowing the seeds to make it more understandable that Luffy would be willing to help him based on what we see of him in this chapter. Because the second we check in with him in the chapter, we end up finding out that apparently Loki actually has a friend. I know, I didn't see that coming either. Though, while he's chained up, it's not like he can do much else besides talk to people. Makes sense that if he talks to the same person long enough, that he'd eventually grow close to them. I do wonder though, where did that Dendamushi come from? Like at first I thought he just got it from Moza, the person we find out is his friend in this chapter, but then we found out that the two have never actually met in person, so that's out. I guess the other giants could have left it for him to call room service or something. I mean, the guy may be a criminal, he may be evil, but he's still got to eat. Actually, you know what? No, I just remembered Loki actually has followers in the underworld. One of them could have easily gotten for him. Now, the interesting thing about the conversation between these two in this chapter is that we get to see a much kinder side to Loki. Definitely seems different to the psychopath that killed his own father we've been made to believe he is. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's still going off about killing and hurting people, but he's talking about specifically doing it out of revenge for whatever this mysterious person did to Moza. Despite his ominous tone at the end here, it really seems like through Oda is trying to make us think that Loki might not actually be that bad, that deep down he might actually be a decent person. Which, if he was able to convince Luffy to work with him, that would explain it, because one of the things Luffy is really good at is reading the true nature of people. So if Loki is actually a decent person deep down, Luffy would be able to sense it. Which, following that line of logic, will then bring us to the question, did he really kill the king, or did Loki just take the blame for it? That's a topic we're more than likely going to explore the further into this arc we go, but one thing I can predict now is that Loki's freedom is going to correlate with the arrival of the two new guests that appear in the Heaven Realm. Because at the end of the chapter, out of a similar demonic circle that was Saturn used on Egghead, black lightning strikes, revealing a woman covered in bandages and a hooded man that looks exactly like Shanks. And yeah, I don't think I need to explain why this is a huge problem. If these two were here on friendly terms, then they would have arrived on a ship at the coast of the island. The fact that they chose this as a method to not only travel to, but sneak onto the island, means they are not here to have a good time. You know, unless their idea of a good time is killing people, because with the cold looks they're giving at the end here, that is more than likely their goal. Now, we all had our theories about who that Shanks lookalike was that visited the Gorosei back in chapter 907. Many assumed it was Oda's big reveal that Shanks isn't exactly on the up and up, and has actually not been Luffy's mentor this entire time, but instead one of his most dangerous future opponents. While others thought that perhaps this was in fact not Shanks, and instead the big reveal was that the captain of the Redhair pirates is in fact one half of a set of twins, and that this hooded man was the other. Personally, I always kind of prefer the twin idea. I never liked the idea of Shanks actually being a real enemy to Luffy. I much prefer him to stick to the mentor role, with the two maybe fighting down the line, but in a much more friendly manner and not in a fight to the death kind of way. But if this guy isn't his twin and is in fact Shanks, then the story might actually be heading towards the kind of dark future that I'm actually not looking forward to. Now, it is important to note that just like in chapter 907, we don't see the other side of his face, so until we see whether or not he has his 3 scars, we don't know for sure if it's actually Shanks or not, which is a mystery that Oda is likely going to hang over our heads for the vast majority of this arc. Like, even if we see these two again in the very next chapter, or even a chapter after that, he'll likely just find a way to keep us from seeing that specific eye until he's ready for the big reveal. And speaking of reveals, no idea who this woman is, not even a guess that would even be remotely possible, but I'm looking forward to finding out in the near future. Regardless of who they are though, these two very clearly came for blood, and even if this person isn't Shanks, if the girls they trust him enough to use their demonic circles to travel in a 2-man squad to the land of giants, they must be very powerful, and someone they can trust to take out even Luffy in Gear 5. Whether they're right or not, it's still kind of up in the air, but I can say that I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the battle play out between these two, finding out who this man is, finding out who that woman is, finding out who Moser is, and seeing exactly how Loki ends up tying into all of this.